You walk into a voting booth, you're about to choose freely your candidate, but with little or no awareness. Your entire life's environmental exposure has been wiring your brain and shaping the person you are. And all your candidate had to do was mention a few familiar triggers to sway you. That's one of the common arguments brought up in debates about whether humans truly have free will. We'll stick with that and more examples like that while using the method true randomness as we go down to the fundamentals of the human mind to see whether free will exists. So in the end, you can decide for yourself if you think you really had that power to begin with. Firstly, have you ever watched magic tricks where the magician usually asks an audience member to think of a number or a word at random and then reveals the exact thing afterward? Well, it surely isn't magic, but rather a lot of preparation by the so-called magician beforehand. Here's how it works. The magician programs the subject or the victim leading up to the show. The subject is followed and subconsciously fed with whatever the magician wants the subject to see and hear by placing signs or numbers wherever the subject might look and listen. The subject then stores this information in short-term memory. When the time comes, the magician asks the subject to think of a number or a word at random. The subject thinks, the brain recalls, and picks from recent memory with the highest sparks. The subject believes the choice is made using free will. The magician, knowing the setup, pretends to guess, says the right thing, and leaves the victim and the audience flabbergasted. Big companies know this. For example, people love Coca-Cola and McDonald's. Everyone knows them. Yet they spend millions of dollars putting ads everywhere every day. Why is that? Imagine going to the shop and trying to choose a drink from the soda aisle. In that split second, when you're asking yourself what to choose, there's a 70 to 90% chance you'll go for Coca-Cola if you've just seen a Coca-Cola billboard on your way there or an ad on YouTube a few hours ago. It's not 100% because you might change your mind at the last second and choose a different brand if a recent memory of watching a YouTube video about the sugar content in Coca-Cola or seeing an ad from another soft drink pops up and causes a conflict with that memory. All of these happen subconsciously while you're deciding. Given examples like this, is it safe now to question the existence of free will or random thoughts? Much of our lives revolve around the information we store in our memory. We grow based on these memories, and they shape our experiences and identities. From early on, when a baby is inside the womb, it listens, and the first sounds it hears kick off the memory storage process. As the baby is born, its brain continues to develop, and its memory capacity expands accordingly as it grows. Let's start at an earlier stage. The human brain starts developing as early as when the embryo is 5 weeks old, which is about the size of an apple seed. By 8 weeks, the basic structures of the brain and central nervous system are in place. Neural networks begin to form and spread. The brain quadruples in size by the time a child finishes preschool. By age 5, it has reached 90% of its adult size. During this developmental period, 700 new neural connections are formed every second as the memory storage capacity rapidly increases. Its first sightings, understanding of colors, first words it hears and learns to say, first steps, first thought formations, first ice cream, first TV shows, and first arguments all contribute to its memory building that shapes that individual. When the brain is fully developed, it boasts a vast network of neural connections that enable a wide range of cognitive functions. This intricate web of neurons and synapses forms the basis of our thoughts, memories, and actions. Let's briefly go over it. The brain consists of these 4 main parts. Starting with the functions of the brainstem, it basically does 2 main things. Firstly, it handles basic functions like keeping you breathing, maintaining circulation, digestion, swallowing, and other similar tasks. Also, it relays motor and sensory signals and coordinates reflexes and movements, especially those related to posture and locomotion. Behind that is the cerebellum, which is responsible for motor control. When you're engaged in sports, for instance, it's the cerebellum that provides you with coordination. It also plays a role in motor memory. So when you learn to ride a bicycle and remember how to do it, you can thank your cerebellum for that. Moving up, we have the thalamus, which acts like a router. It sorts data and sends it where it needs to go, receiving sensory signals from various parts of the body and directing them to the appropriate areas for processing. At the very top is the cerebrum. That's where the magic happens, where all incoming data is integrated and understood. For example, if you look at these 2 images right here, billions of neurons in the cerebrum will start to activate, meaning your brain is integrating the information and trying to make sense of it or store that information. Now, I won't name each section of the cerebrum. Instead, let's focus on something simpler and more fundamental, the neuron. Neurons are the brain's building blocks. responsible for creating memories, learning, generating thoughts and imaginations, and supporting cognitive functions that make you, you. Let's see how one works on a microscopic level. The center of a neuron is called the cell body, which contains the nucleus and other standard cell components. Extending from it are the dendrites, which receive signals from other neurons. The long part is called the axon, which acts like a wire to send signals from the receiving end down to the synapse, the gap where synaptic transmission occurs. This is how one neuron passes information to another. Let's look at it in detail. Before a neuron fires, it is negatively charged on the inside and positively charged on the outside. Here it's at resting potential of around negative 70 millivolts. An action potential or electrical signal starts when you're thinking, studying, walking, etc. When you do that, these electrical charges will rush down the neuron and it will become a little more positive. And when it gets enough stimulation and reaches the threshold potential, negative 55 millivolts, it will cause the sodium-gated channels to open up and let in the sodium ions. And because they are so positive, they will change the voltage inside the neuron to become positive and raise the voltage to positive 40 millivolts. This is what an action potential is, a wave of depolarization that travels along the length of the neuron. So next, the positive charges will open a different voltage-gated channel that lets in calcium ions. These calcium ions will then bind to the proteins on the synaptic vesicles, which contain the chemical messages called neurotransmitters. Here, for example, we have glutamate, which is involved in learning, memory, and cognition. Another example is dopamine, which plays a role in reward, motivation, and pleasure. So the binding of the calcium ions to the vesicles is going to cause a chemical change, and that will trigger them to go fuse with the membrane of the presynaptic neuron. Then all the neurotransmitters will be released into the synaptic cleft, the gap. They will then bind to the receptors of the ligand-gated ion channels on the postsynaptic neuron. These gates open based on the binding of chemicals, unlike the previous gates, which open in response to voltage changes. Now, when the neurotransmitters bind to the receptors, the gates will open and the sodium will rush in like what happened above. It's the same process. They will start depolarizing or turning the next neuron positive. That's going to cause another action potential. And that process is going to continue again and again. However, this activation of neurons and synaptic connections leads to short-term memory, with synapses undergoing temporary changes that last seconds to minutes. For example, you might remember a phone number briefly before it fades, but with repeated activation, these circuits strengthen, leading to long-term potentiation, which are crucial for converting short-term memories into long-term ones. This primarily happens in the hippocampus, where short-term memories are converted into long-term memories. If that part of your brain is removed, it would be nice to meet you to everyone you meet after the day of removal for the rest of your life. Back to synaptic transmission. That's also what happens when the brain processes the information we gather primarily through our sensory receptors. As humans, we rely on a set of senses that we use constantly, including sight, smell, taste, touch, and hearing. The nervous system enables us to sense and respond to our environment, with sensory receptors picking up signals or stimuli from the world around us. To illustrate the sense of sight, imagine standing in front of a beautiful sunset. As the sunlight hits your eyes, light receptors in the retina detect the colors and intensity of the light. These light signals are converted into electrical impulses that travel along the optic nerve to the brain. There, the brain processes the information, allowing you to perceive the vibrant oranges, pinks, and purples, and understand that you're watching a sunset, and storing this image as a beautiful memory for future use. Well, the future is here, and you fit together all the images of sunsets in your brain and paint a sunset, calling it creativity. But have you ever truly painted something entirely new or random? Take a second, close your eyes, and imagine something new. I bet you'll just see the universe and recall things you're already familiar with. Maybe nothing humans have ever painted, imagined, or created is entirely new. Everything we create comes from memory. Everything we know is from this universe, passed down from the first humans to the present day. We've just become creative with them with time. You might be thinking, what about the device you're watching this on? It seems entirely new. Well, let's give credit to the first person who figured out electricity from nature, then the person who put it into a circuit, and the next person, and so on. It's all time, passed down knowledge, and human creativity. Creativity itself is not just an innate talent, but a skill that can be cultivated. Both internal and external factors must work together to foster creativity. Internally, your knowledge, imagination, and attitude shape your creative potential, while externally, resources, habitat, and culture influence it. They are interconnected. For example, the more knowledge you have, the better you can recognize and utilize the resources in your environment. In turn, these resources help expand your knowledge. It's a cycle where each factor influences the others. Now, the imagination part might seem a little troubling because it is a product of consciousness. And the nature of consciousness has troubled both philosophers and scientists across various fields to this day. And since we're here, let's go down that rabbit hole. Firstly, let's do a thought experiment to uncover why we are able to do thought experiments. And let's imagine a perfect system for the human brain. A brain is grown without any human body parts or receptors, but it is fed necessary nutrients for growth around a specific time daily. Will it have consciousness? It sees nothing, not even blackness, hears, tastes, and feels nothing. Will it have identity? Will it make up a story to entertain itself? Will it develop billions of neurons and memory from nothing? It might develop some neural activity or a sense of timing to prepare for its feeding time. But that's it. It's alive but cannot do or think. Alive but unconscious in a way. It is sleeping, waiting for something to kickstart thought process, imagination, calculations, and so on. Now, what if in an unlikely tin-foiled hat scenario, this brain is supported for a very long time and begins to evolve on its own? What if it starts performing calculations because it can detect invisible matter containing the mysteries of the universe? What if it begins to control matter and turns evil? And, okay, too much imagination. But I hope this illustrates my point. Consciousness arises with external influences and internal parts working together. As for internal parts working together, here's the famous case of Joe, who had his right and left hemispheres separated during surgery to treat severe epilepsy and experienced strange effects afterward. For instance, when Joe was shown a picture of a saw in his left visual field, he couldn't verbally describe it, so he made up a story. However, when asked to draw what he saw with his left hand, he was able to draw a saw. In another instance, Joe would use his right hand to button a shirt, while his left hand would simultaneously try to unbutton it. These examples may suggest that all the non-conscious parts of the brain must work together to create the conscious self. If one part is isolated, unusual behaviors emerge. But when all parts operate in unison, they give rise to consciousness and the state of being. And yet, the mystery still remains. All of these unconscious processes or parts in the brain performing different tasks must have a final processing destination somewhere to create the sense of self. Perhaps that final part works like a biological prediction machine, like how it learns and predicts its next feeding time. And perhaps all our next actions, thoughts, and imaginations are processed there to be fine-tuned probabilistically to predict the next perfect outcome given memory, biases, and other variables. And it may be that, while we are computable, we remain beyond the limits of our current understanding. But in the end, for us to think, I think therefore I am, now why am I, is freaking holy on its own, no matter if we come to understand it as something simpler in the future. So does free will or true randomness exist in the human brain? Not exactly. Complexity? Yes. To the point of being divine yet computable, discrete yet continuous, grounded in flesh and blood, electrical charges, and chemical changes. It's physical matter in the brain that causes the mind. We'll get there to truly understand it.